¿Ahí me escuchás vos? Sí, bueno, mira, te hago una consulta. Ella no está escuchando el ruido de la sala.
Muy bajito.
Para ver dónde está el volumen.
Ahí escucho de las dos orejas, ¿verdad?
¿Ahí sí escuchas bien?
Sí, ahí
¿Sí?
mejor.
Bueno, y te hago una consulta. ¿Este micrófono era el 1 o el 2?
A ver, hablame un toque más.
¿Este era el 1? A ver si yo... ¿Ahí me escuchás? No. Y ahí sí me escuchás. Está bien, entonces es el 1.
Este es el 1 y este es el 2.
Y ese es el 2. Ok. Bueno. Ya estamos al aire. Mm. Sí, ahí te muteo. Sí, pero...
Desmuteame cuando arranque. Porfi. Ay, sabes que no me traje agua. Le voy a pedir a los chicos que me consigan. Porque con esto no vamos a pintar la pieza. Mira, ¿querés pedirle vos a Martín si nos puede conseguir agüita? ¿Y mamá? Desmuteame, tengo que abrir la boca. Igual que está ahí justo con el tema de la conexión con el exterior.
Vicky. No, vení un minutito, por favor. Te lo paso. Y tendremos claro. Sí. Pero sí, es cierto.
Todos de pie, por favor.
All right.
Ingresa el honorable jurado.
Please be seated.
En primer lugar,
First of all,
al
we
jurado.
would like to greet the members of the jury.
Hoy? ¿Han descansado
I
ayer?
hope you all rested and you're feeling okay this morning.
Como yo se los había adelantado
As I had
ayer,
previously stated
hoy es el
yesterday,
día en que las
today
partes van a
is the day in
formular
which the
sus
parties
alegatos de cierre,
will
sus
state
alegatos
their
de
closing
clausura.
statement.
Después le voy a preguntar yo al
After this,
imputado
I'm
si
going to
desea
ask the
decir alguna
defendant if he
última
wishes to
palabra.
say some last
Hacemos un
words.
cuarto
We are
intermedio
going
para
to
que
take a
ustedes puedan
break
tomar un café
thereafter for you
y
to take some coffee,
posteriormente
and
yo les voy a
later
impartir
I'm
las
going to give you
instrucciones.
some instructions.
Antes de comenzar
Before we begin,
formalmente, consulto a los funcionarios de la Secretaría de Información Pública. Están funcionando todas las conexiones. Abajo está bien. ¿Está escuchando el señor Gil Pereg?
is Mr. Pereg able to listen to this transmission?
Por favor, Martín, gracias.
Thank you, Martin, for checking this out.
¿Está todo bien? Bien.
Everything is okay?
Entonces,
Good. Then we're good to
declaramos
go. We would like to
reabierta la audiencia
open
en la causa
today's
número
hearing in our cause
4145/19,
number
seguida a instancia
4145/19
fiscal y de la querella particular contra el señor
against
Gil Pereg.
Mr.
Le
Pereg.
consulto a los abogados
I would like to
defensores
ask
si
the
han podido
defense
entrevistar al señor
if
Gil
you
Pereg
were able
y
to
si el
interview
señor
Mr.
Pereg ha
Pereg,
manifestado
and
si
if
desea
Mr.
estar hoy
Pereg
presente aquí en la sala.
manifests his will to be
Sí,
present here in the
lo
room.
entrevistamos recién y no.
We asked him
Está
already
en la
and
sala,
he
va a
said he
seguir
wasn't.
desde
por circuito cerrado.
He would prefer to listen to these hearing in the closed circuit.
Habiendo terminado la
Having
recepción de toda la
finished
prueba, las partes
analyzing
van a
all the
formular
evidence,
sus
the parties
alegatos
are going
finales.
to
El primer término
state
tiene la
their
palabra
final
el
closing statements, and the public prosecutor has the first word.
Buen día.
Good morning,
Señores jueces de los hechos,
jury of
vamos
the
a comenzar
facts.
tratando de ser lo más
We
breves
will
y puntuales
begin
posible estos alegatos
with
de cierre,
these final
porque
statements.
entiendo que
We will try
repasar
to
de
be
nuevo
brief
testigo
because
por
we
testigo
understand
sería faltarles el
that
respeto en el sentido que
talking
ustedes
again
aprecian ahora mismo que
about
nosotros.
each of the
Entonces estamos
witnesses in
hablando de un
detail
asesinato
wouldn't make
despiadado y
sense
ahora podemos
since you have
agregar
already
que el
heard
asesinato fue
everything.
cometido también
We
con
can
plena
say that this
comprensión
ruthless
de la
murder
criminalidad del acto
was
que llevó
committed
adelante el
with a
senador
full
Gil Pereg.
understanding of the
Vamos a ver
criminality of the
qué pasó en los
facts.
alegatos de
So
apertura
we
de la
will
defensa.
start by
¿Cuáles fueron
analyzing
las
the
afirmaciones
opening
y si alguna
remarks
de
and
ellas
arguments
resultó
of the
cierta?
defense
Dijeron que era
to check
un
whether they
discurso
were
cerrado de
true
opción
or
única.
not.
Van a ver
They
en los
said
formularios
that
de
we
veredicto que esto
spoke
no es así,
as if this
que
case
tienen
could
más de una
only be
opción, que pueden
resolved in one
declararlo
way.
no
However,
culpable,
you
que
will
pueden
see that
declararlo
you
no
still have
culpable en
the
razón de la
option to
imputabilidad y que
find
inclusive
that the
existiría
defendant
un delito
is
menor incluido.
unpunishable.
También
At the same
les
time,
pidieron que no fuercen la
you were
unanimidad,
asked
pero
not
la
to
unanimidad es un
force
requisito que se
unanimity.
establece por la ley.
However, this is a
Tienen que llegar a
requirement
la
of
unanimidad,
the law.
obviamente en caso
We
de
need
ser posible,
unanimity,
para que el
if
jurado no se
possible,
estanque.
for
Si se estancara, se los digo
us to
ahora, esto
avoid
lo voy a
a
hacer con la acción
mistrial.
penal, porque hay un principio
If we
constitucional
have
que
a
impide que
mistrial,
una persona pueda
we
ser juzgada
won't
dos
be
veces por el
able
mismo hecho.
to continue
Y
with these
justamente la
proceedings
unanimidad es
because of
una
double
garantía
jeopardy.
en favor del
Double
imputado,
jeopardy is a
que ningún otro acto de
procedural
gobierno exige. Uno
defense,
puede ser
a
presidente por mayoría,
constitutional
senador
defense
por
that
mayoría,
prohibits
magistrado
anyone
con
from
una
being
mayoría
prosecuted
especial
twice from the
con el
same
acuerdo del Senado. Nada en la
crime,
República
and
Argentina,
we
salvo
don't
este acto
have
tan trascendental de
privileges
administrar
for
justicia,
anyone
exige
else
unanimidad.
except
O sea, es
in
una
this
garantía en favor
case.
de él.
This is the only
El
case
problema no es
that
la definición
requires
de ulpiano.
unanimity.
Ulpiano, de todas maneras, les
And
aviso
the
que
problem
era
is
fenicio
not the
y no nació en el
definition
500
of
ni vivió en
Ulpian.
el 500.
This jurist,
Nació el
who actually
170 al
was not
228
Roman,
antes de
was
Cristo.
Phoenician,
El concepto de
and the
justicia ha
dates that
permanecido
they provided for
inalterado.
their birth were
El
wrong as
problema
well.
es cuál
But
es el contenido
here,
de lo
the
que
problem has to
muchas
do
veces
with
ese
the concept of
contenido de valor de
justice,
justicia
and many
ha
times
permitido las mayores
the
impunidades
content of these
escondido
definitions
atrás de un
sometimes
tecnicismo. Y eso es lo
hide
que no pasa
impunity
ante los jurados.
behind technical
Dijeron
concepts.
también
And this
si
is
se
why we
cometió
have
el
a
hecho
jury here
fue
to
de manera
avoid
no
this.
consciente.
They
También
said
es una
that if he
afirmación
committed the
fácil.
crime,
Si
he
tú eres
was
no
not
consciente
conscious
porque
of
la
that.
conciencia es un
However,
sintetizador de la función mental, no
consciousness
habría acción,
guides mental
no
functions.
sería
It
no
would
culpable,
be
no
impossible
habría
not to
directamente
have
acción
an action.
por parte del
If we
senador
have an
Gil
action,
Pereg.
we have conscience as well.
Entonces, en consecuencia, tampoco
In
habría
addition to
delito.
this,
Bien,
we wouldn't have a
otras
crime.
falsedades.
So this is yet another
Cuando
false
les dije los
statement.
ladrillos, obviamente se los digo
When
en sentido
I
figurado,
used the
metafórico.
word
No me voy a
bargain,
poner ahora
of
explicando que es
course,
una
I
metáfora.
was using a
La
metaphor,
sociedad no es justa
as
y
you
atribuye
probably understand.
responsabilidades en particular a mi persona como
They
lo hizo en
were
varias
talking
oportunidades por
about
nombre y apellido.
my
Siempre me
person, they
preocupé
were
de
talking
tratar de
about
repetir.
myself,
Nunca me ocupé de
using my
presentarme.
name and
Fernando Busto,
surname.
51 años,
My
31
name
años
is
dentro del
Fernando
Poder
Russo. I
Judicial,
have 31 years of
defensor por
experience
concurso,
in this type of proceedings.
fiscal de Cámara por concurso,
I am
ahora
an
fiscal
attorney
en
who
jefe de
have
homicidio.
come to this
Ojalá
position by
esta
my own
pista
merit.
tuviera estos números.
And we can show you the
458
numbers
audiencias,
for all the
5
hearings
en
that we have
2021,
conducted,
109 condenas,
858.
18
Here you
suspensiones
can
de
see
prueba.
the figures
Debo
for
decir,
our
y de
probations
algunas,
and
y hay
convictions,
también otras
and we
muchas,
have
pero
many
trabajamos
cases
todos los días.
that
858
were not settled as
audiencias
we
en lo que va del
expected,
año.
but we work every day to bring
Así que
justice
no
to
creo
our
que
province.
contribuya mucho en la injusticia de esta sociedad.
So I
El
think that
ejemplo
I'm
es un
making
poco
a huge
desafortunado
contribution
porque
to the
les ha
justice
falseado
in
las
our province.
informaciones, ha
They
falseado
also
la
mentioned
información
this
sobre
local
Julián
character,
y les ha falseado
Marjuan,
también cuál
but
fue el
here
motivo
there was
del
also
sobrecedero.
there were false statements
También
related to
les
this
pide
because
fondos
they
no
didn't
autorizados
mention
en su
his
alegato.
diagnosis.
No dijimos
In
nada,
addition
la
to
verdad no
this,
nos incomoda,
they
la verdad no nos
exhibited some
duele,
pictures
la
that had
verdad
not been
no hace
introduced
mesa
as
con toda la
evidence
prueba que
before,
les hemos presentado.
and we don't
Dice
really
que hace
object at
51
that because we're not
Gil Pereg que los
uncomfortable
números hacen el
with
mal.
the
Bueno,
facts.
veamos de
Gil
qué
Pereg
forma podemos
stated
interpretar
that he
que Gil
doesn't
Pereg
feel
fue un
human
asesinato
because
tan cruel.
human beings
Olvidemos
do wrong.
y vamos a repasar
I I don't know how he can understand that he has done right. At the same time, they spoke about deliriums and hallucinations, which are not part of the evidence. Is this really a delirium, or is this just something that the defendant is stating? We also need to analyze the impunity of the opening statements of the defense. Why did they do that? First of all, we know that opening statements are not evidence, and that this type of insults during the trial are still allowed because they're not evidence. This is why they were able to say whatever they wanted. And they have reserves that are in favor of the defense. Their behavior during the defense was aimed at attacking, discrediting, and objecting, contesting all the witnesses presented by the public prosecution. They highlighted irrelevant contradictions. They were out there just trying to get something to favor their case. And they were not able to find this thing they were searching for. We had party-appointed witnesses who have actually been paid by the defense, and actually Pereg was the one who arranged all these payments using his mental capabilities. And the truth is that they feel uncomfortable sometimes because they do not want to hear what the witnesses wanted to state. Actually, we obtain the best responses from their own witnesses, from the defense witnesses, because actually we wouldn't dare to ask some of the things that they did ask, but we profited from those responses. Whoever said that Pereg was a cat and behaved like a cat before the crime? We heard about the fact that he was aware of the fact that there is an association of architects, that he is aware of rules, that he is aware of many laws and regulations. So he has a lot of information, complex information, which he was able to analyze. So we want to address the issue of mental capacity. As we said before, the law assumes that there is mental capacity. In this case, in addition to assuming, we have proven this. And I'm telling you this for you to understand which is the role of a technical judge, which is the role of each of the parties. When we don't know something, when we don't understand something, we bring witnesses, we bring experts. So this is not us being more intelligent than you are. Of course we're not. We're here to conduct an investigation. In this case, we're analyzing legal capacity. This is based on facts, and this is based on evidence, as we have seen. And this also has a legal aspect to it, because it has legal consequences, because we need to decide what we will do with Mr. Pereg and the ruthless murder that he committed, the homicide that he perpetrated. This can be solved based on common sense, personal experience, and evidence. At the same time, during the opening remarks and arguments, we never said that Mr. Pereg is a healthy person. We know that he has a pathology. However, we need to decide whether this pathology prevents him from being fit to plead, from understanding the criminality of the facts. I think that after seeing all the evidence that we have seen, we now know that he fully understood the criminality of the act and that he knows what he is doing. Of course, I'm not an expert in this, but what I do know is that regardless of him having paraphrenia or lycanthropy, he still can be held responsible for his acts. So I told you the first day not to be deceived. Don't allow him to deceive you because he's not unpunishable. All the persons, all the reports, with just a few slight differences, all the reports presented by the defense said that he's an unusual person, that he's an extravagant person. Of course, this has to do also with our social cultural perception of things, but at the same time, he was never persecuted because of that. We were not after him. He was able to carry a normal, peaceful life. His critical judgment and mental capabilities were preserved. He was able to tell right from wrong. He's a narcissist. He's aware of the reality or how unreal his delirium is. Except for Castex, who was with him during 1 hour and 38 minutes, and he stated that he saw him having a hallucination, but except for that witness, all the others said that he never behaved like a cat before them. Everyone said that there were no hallucinations. Everyone said that he was not perceiving things that were not there. In addition to this, some people, or actually the defense, say that he doesn't understand. However, what we see is that he's able to make demands, to ask questions, to negotiate, to persuade, to enter into strategic alliances like the one he established with Mrs. Rivas. This is something apparent for us. This creates empathy between them. Yesterday, Dr. Hannah says that she has been seeing the same patient for 25 years, and we could all perceive her affection, her feelings for that patient. But except from Rivas and Castex, nobody else spoke about someone being punishable or impunishable, because this is something that the judge needs to decide and that the jury needs to decide, not psychiatrists, not the psychologists. As we said before, he's able to threaten people, and this is why we didn't rush things. We have been here for a year and a half responding to his demands, because actually he was discharged in December 2020, and he was admitted there in the first place because it was a voluntary hospital admission. We know that he's very intelligent, that he has a high intellectual coefficient, and the defense says that he's not able to understand anything, that he lacks understanding. However, he's able to appear before justice agencies. He's able to report a missing gun, and then he goes and says that he already found it. So when he wants, he's able to follow rules and to abide by the law. Let's see which was the psychological approach. Since he first arrived in the penitentiary, he received care, and for the first weeks, he wouldn't relieve himself on the floor, he wouldn't act like a cat. Apparently, the idea came to him later because he had already prepared his strategy. So this is something that he prepared to avoid his responsibility. We also are fully convinced that we have protected their rights. He has received proper care in the penitentiary twice a week with an interdisciplinary team, and several psychologists and psychiatrists saw him. And here we're talking about what happened between January and December 2020. There he also received in the El Sauce hospital proper care. Actually, he has received computed tomographies. He underwent computed tomographies with perfectly normal results, and this is true even today. So the multidisciplinary approach was present. We had 6 interviews with psychologists, with psychiatrists who prepared the reports that we told you before, and they described some schizotypal characteristics of personality. There you also have the reports from the penitentiary. There were many people who didn't sign their reports, but there are a lot of people and professionals behind those reports. And he was discharged, and actually he signed a consent to be admitted to hospital. They said that this admission was only related to the medication that he needed, and this is why it was voluntary, because there were no criteria otherwise to allow this type of admission. Everyone described him as a person with no hallucinations. His mental capabilities are preserved and he's legally qualified. Dr. Hannah said maybe before sometime he had a psychotic break. She explained this using an example, and he said that even if he did have a psychotic break, still his intelligence was within the normal range and that he was able to understand reality. So maybe Castex is the only one who arrived to a different diagnosis after just one interview without a multidisciplinary approach, and therefore this was very subjective. Still, he said that we needed to analyze this in the context of evidence, which is what we're doing. So, sometimes I like to make questions instead of making statements. So maybe you can now think, was the public prosecution objective? Did we try to create confusion? Did we put obstacles to the work of the defense? Did we protect the rights that Mr. Pereg has? Did we respect and observe due process? And regarding our evidence, the one that we submitted, was it reliable? Was it backed by scientific information? Because I'm fully convinced that we have a very professional, independent, and biased and committed team working here not only in the public prosecution, but also based on the work conducted by the police, by the scientific police who have been working hard on this case. So were we able to prove this beyond reasonable doubt? Did we present it when, how, and where the crime occurred? Was Mr. Pereg the author? Is there a criminal malicious intent? Did he shoot his aunt? Do we have the enhancements of the choice of weapon and kinship here? You should ask yourselves all of these questions to check whether we proved what we said that we would prove with our opening statements. Is there any reasonable doubt? Because we believe that the only possible verdict is a verdict of guilty. Now we can analyze the words of the defendant. Actually, what we saw is that he fully understands what's going on around him. Actually, he said and made statements that showed that he was able to exercise his will. He said, I decided that I wanted to become a cat. He spoke about both this, But he said that Balthus appeared in Mendoza after he was shot in his back. However, the psychologist said that he could not name the different parts of his body. He said that he decided to escape from Israel with the consent of his mother, who was the one that always provided for him and protected him. Here, I'm thinking about different options, because we could have extenuating circumstances if he had ever been mistreated by his mother or his aunt, that he himself mentioned that he was never mistreated by his mother. Actually, he said that she was the only one to protect him. He also said that he thought he was a cat. Did you hear somebody said that he acted like a cat? Nobody said that. This is something that exists only in the imagination of Mr. Pereg and of the defense lawyers. At the same time, he said that he was wearing a mask. This is very important because he said that he could use a human mask for 5 or 6 hours. When we met him was the time when he first reported that his mother had gone missing. And he continued to wear that mask in front of the media, during the interviews, during the reports that he presented, and apparently he was able to use his human mask throughout this time. And he was able to make questions, to make demands, and he was not speaking before like he spoke yesterday. He actually acknowledges the link that he has to his mother and to his aunt. He was speaking about two-legged creatures. However, here he said, my mother and my aunt, establishing a bond. Therefore, we also believe that he is fully capable of acting with freedom, with discernment, and here the defense lawyers say that he is incapable of conducting legal acts and that he is an incapable, unqualified person. However, they are the ones who are being paid by him and are accepting his wire transfers. Here he tried to accuse the public prosecution as well. Now we can check something else. He said, it's madness to say that I killed them. So here we have a supposedly mad people who can realize or can be aware of somebody else's madness. This is quite strange to my mind. And then he uses several statements. He told the defense lawyer, I have already said that. I have already mentioned that. I want to make an important comment. He used all these phrases which actually show that he understands what's going on around him. So not even the loudest meow can silence or distort the fact that we're facing a human who fully understood the criminality of the act. This is not about revenge. This is justice. This is about justice for the entire society, because this is just what he deserves. This is the only reason why we are here. And actually last night I was thinking about this. If this was not a court, if this was a church, I would have to say this is a miracle, because yesterday he didn't meow, he behaved like a human, he spoke like a human, he was able to understand. So if this was a church, I would say that this, what we saw yesterday, was a miracle. But this is a court, and this is why we need to continue to say that we proved that he is guilty, and we hope that you render a verdict of guilty. And now I will play this video that summarizes what happened here.
Good morning, members of the jury. Time has come. Time has come for you to arrive to a verdict. That's why I would like to ask you to evaluate every evidence. Integrate the evidence that you were in face with. I know that the public ministry has been able to show you in the opening statement and during the course of this trial, we've been able to prove the following. Prior to the event, Pereg didn't have, I'm sorry, Dr. Rios, I've been informed that we've lost connection downstairs. This means that Mr. Pereg, who is following all the course of the event upstairs, unfortunately is not receiving signal. So let us fix this and then you can restart from the very beginning your statement. Statement. So he also presented a lawsuit for three firearms that were stolen, among which we have the weapon that he used to um, kill his aunt. And then he presented a report for the guns that had been stolen. Also, we need to highlight that on January 11th, 2019, the victims rented an apartment on España Street where they were living at that time. And on January 12th, the security cameras actually had an image at 7:20 approximately a.m. have images of Lily Pereg and Mr. Pereg, and at 9 a.m. approximately the cameras already show the images of Lily Pereg and Peria Sarusi as well as Mr. Pereg. This is something that restated Mr. Lescano, and he stated that three mugs of coffee had been washed and had been used at the apartment on España Street. Also, the cameras show images in San Martin Street, and at 9:20 approximately, they were located in San Martin and Lavalle Street, heading to the bus stop. Also, it's worth mentioning that there were three trips that actually took place from España Street to Guaymallén And in Guaymallén, they actually got off the bus in Cabildo Abierto Street and Carrilgo de Cruz. And after that, the cameras have images in the cemetery of Guaymallén in Roca Street, where they were actually walking towards the house of the defendant. At 10:06, 10:07, and 10:09, we can see them on the cameras. And the security cameras also on Roca Street in the cemetery of Guaymallén, that is opposite Gilpereg's gate, actually were broken. It's also worth mentioning that on January 12, 2019, the witnesses stated, Mr. Salinas actually stated that between 10:30 and 12, they heard the shouting of a woman saying no, no, no. And also they heard 3 shots. This was expressed by Mr. Salinas and Mr. Salinas Jr. We also should mention that on January 14th, Mr. Gil Pereg reported he first went to the to the apartment, to tell Mr. Ray that he was looking for his aunt and his mother. Then he went to the police station for tourists and said everything that he had reported later on, and then he was sent to the prosecutor's office where he reported falsely the whereabouts of his aunt and mother. After doing this false report, he continued with his daily activities and he went to an airline office to change a flight that he had to Rome. This is very important. What happened on January 15, 2019, he went to the National Agency for Firearms Control to state that he had already found the 3 firearms that he had reported as stolen previously. So, now, on January 15, 2019, there was a raid performed at the apartment that the victims had rented. In these apartments, they tried to capture these interest elements. Actually, they found the victims' toothbrushes. On January 15th as well, there was a raid performed in Mr. Hills Pereg house, and the 3 firearms actually were got there, one of which was the homicide weapon. We corroborated later on with one of the shells that these corresponded to the same firearm used to kill Lily Pereg. It's very important to mention as well that there was another raid performed in Mr. Gil Pereg's house, and this was on January 18th, and here we found a white t-shirt owned by Mr. Gil Pereg that the officer Reyes stated that there were droplets of blood, which means that there was an interaction with another person and therefore stains of blood appeared in his shirt. Also, Officer Campos, who was present in the raids, stated that everything was very dirty, but that on the table there were dishes, there were forks and knives, and that at the bottom of the house there was a cement bag that had some droplets of blood as well. Afterwards, they held DNA tests of these droplets of blood found, and both in the cement bag and in the t-shirt. And when they matched the DNA with the toothbrushes DNA, it matches Lily Pereg's DNA. It's also worth mentioning that there was another raid performed when we have these results. Actually, when we got the DNA results, these test results helped the public prosecutor to actually arrest Mr. Gil Pereg. We arrested him on Friday, as Mr. Hilperek stated yesterday, on January 25th, 2019, which was a Friday, and on a Saturday, as Mr. Hilperek stated yesterday himself, we performed a raid where the scan dogs actually found all these blood stains and found also the corpses of the victims that were located almost 1 meter deep with wood and with stones over them. And these determined that the victims had been impaled, their bodies had been profanated, and there were bars, actually metal bars, inserted in their bodies. Remember the cause of death of these women? In the case of Lily Pereg, she received 3 gunshots in her chest, and in the case of Piria Sarusi, Hilpereg's mom, she was strangled to death. This is very important, but it's also worth mentioning all the interviews that Mr. Hilpereg had at that time. While we were looking for his aunt and mother, he was actually giving interviews to the journalists, stating the insecurity of the province, accusing some neighbors actually of the disappearance of the victims, that he had actually presented a false statement at the time. This is all very important, and I would like you to remember all these evidence, all these testimonies that were presented, and please remember that Hilpereg admitted himself voluntarily to a psychiatric hospital due to pharmacological issues. And he has actually been released from hospital, but he decides to stay there. And on February 15th, 2019, Mr. Hilpereg, the inside the prison, sold the lawyers that are defending him 20 firearms. And today the defense is saying that he's mentally that they have no particular interest in this case. They are just serving justice, and they say that they had critical judgment, that he was fully orientated, that he has very high intellectual coefficient, very high IQ, that he's very manipulative because he wants to convince people what he is stating. And something also very important that was stated by Dr. Hanna yesterday was that if he had actually a psychotic episode, this would have been seen in the first interviews performed very few days after the events and very few days after his arrest. That's why I would like to kindly request you to analyze these evidence, integrate all the evidence that you were faced with, and I would also like to request you that you...
Now we will give the floor to the private prosecutor. Good morning. Gil Pereg, as I told you the first day, killed his mother and his aunt, knowingly and understanding what he was doing. He wanted to do this, and he did it. This is why afterwards he used these metal bars that were mentioned before to impale them, and he buried these bodies, these corpses, underground. At the same time, he also buried the documents, the IDs, the passports, and everything they were carrying with them. The documents that would allow for their identification. Then they covered them with stones, with pieces of wood, and after that, he went to report that both of them were missing. Then, of course, he started giving all these interviews and talking to the media, and this went on and on for several days while the police was searching for the two women. This is what you need to use as the information on which you will base your verdict. Why did he do all these things? because what he wanted was actually to deviate the attention of justice, and he wanted to do as many things as possible to avoid being linked and connected to the disappearance of these two women. During all these hearings that you have had, you have been able to get acquainted with the evidence. You were able to listen to many witnesses and people who testified here. Some of them were neighbors, some of them had a temporary relationship with him years ago or a few days before the event. And all of them agreed on the fact that, except for his unusual physical appearance, they never saw anything that would lead them to believe that he had problems to communicate or that he suffered from any kind of disability or mental health disorder. On the contrary, they stated that he didn't have problems to communicate. Even though he was from Israel, he was able to communicate in Spanish, he was able to make decisions, and whenever he had problems, he knew what he had to do. He knew how to proceed and how to act. And what's most important, all of them agreed on the fact that for as long as they knew him, for as long as they were neighbors, until the very last minute, never did Mr. Gil Pereg tell them that he was a cat, and never did he act like a cat, and never did they hear any meowing. This is why we believe that during this trial we were able to prove that he was leading an ordinary life, where he was able to engage in transactions, to relate to neighbors. He had a working relationship with the people that were working on his own premises. He was able even to have a sentimental relationship and a girlfriend. He talked to the veterinarian, so he had a social life which was quite ordinary. Just as these things have been proved, I want to highlight that there are two things that were not proved. These things have been mentioned several times throughout the trial. The first thing that they mentioned was that they was swindled once and again, that he was the victim of a scam. But here we just saw that once there was an architect who swindled him, and what he did, what Mr. Pereg did, faced with that event, was to report the case to the Association of Architects and to justice. In addition to this, he was conducting some bricklaying work at home, and then there is a second circumstance that was not proven here, but that you heard it once and again during the trial, is that Mr. Pereg, as the defense lawyers said, had been admitted to hospital once and again when he was in Israel. Today he has 40 years old. He was born in Israel. He went to school there. He actually went to college there, and he went to the army. In 2007, with 26 years old, he was already living here in Argentina, living the life that we all now know. So now I ask, when was he admitted to hospital in Israel? In which hospital? Which are the dates, the specific dates? Which medication did he receive? Because we've not seen any exhibit proving this. We've not seen any documentary evidence to prove all these repeated admissions to mental health hospitals in Israel. Mental health professionals who examined Mr. Pereg since the day of his arrest were psychiatrists and psychologists, both forensic and from the penitentiary and from El Sauce Hospital. All these professionals agree on something, as Mr. Busso stated. They all say that he has a pathology, and we also agree with that.
psicopatía
He has some kind of
que
schizotypal
digamos que son
pathology
diagnosticados y quiero ser
that,
profesionales de una manera
in their words,
importante de todas
makes
las
him act in an unusual way, and this is why
al
we see him as an extravagant character.
pero salvo eso
But except for that,
o sea esta esquizopatía
this pathology actually only affects one part of his brain,
en todo el resto de los
but
puede
all
llevar
the
una vida
rest, all
perfectamente
the other
normal
parts of his brain allow him to lead a perfectly normal life like the one he led before being arrested.
para actuar extravagante,
So he has
llamativa,
these unusual
pero
ways,
es una
as we
persona que
know,
se
but
desenvuelve y
he's
actúa
still able
a la
to
vista
live
de las
in
pruebas. En
society,
ese momento
and
se
we have
desenvolvió
proved this
normalmente
with all
en el
the
desarrollo
evidence
de
that
todos los
you've
años de
seen
su vida.
through the trial. This was proved
Y también es
before
importante que
his
todos
arrest. And
profesionales
it's also
de
very
salud
important for us
también
to see that
coincidieron en
all these
señalar
professionals agreed on the
que el
fact
Pereg no
that
empezó a
Mr.
orinar tiempo
Hilperek
hasta
only
cuando
started
habían pasado
meowing
aproximadamente unas 2 semanas
after
de su
2 weeks
detención
from
cuando
his arrest.
empezó a
This
hacer
is when he
lo que
decided
podríamos
to
llamar
act like a cat and to
extraño.
embark in
Pero
this
también
more
coincidieron en señalar
strange
que estos movimientos,
behavior.
que
But
esta
they
forma
also
de actuar
explained that these
siempre tuvo
behaviors
alguna finalidad.
were
El
part of
defensor
a strategy,
se enfocaba
because
en
actually the defendant behaved in this way when he wanted something in exchange.
cuando era
For instance,
convocado a las
he would
audiencias
behave
y
as a
una
cat
persona le
when
pedía
he was
tiempo porque
about
no quería estar en la audiencia
to be
porque no
taken
quería
to a hearing that he didn't want to attend or
una
that he
audiencia
didn't
de
want to
apertura del
occur.
juicio porque no
You
quería
saw
estar
him
acá porque no
meowing
quería
during the
presenciar el juicio
first day
y
of
mostraba
this trial
lo
because
feliz
he was
que quería
upset.
ver el caos,
He didn't want this
no quería
trial
que lo llevaran a
to
la
occur.
penitenciaría. Y lo más
He
importante
used
es que
this
nunca
behavior to
para
manipulate and to persuade us into doing what he wanted.
cada vez que
And
quiere
every time he wants
a todos
us
nosotros
to believe
a la sociedad él es un gato
that he is a
una
cat,
persona
he
que no
starts
puede
acting
comprender
in this
que no
way.
puede llevar
He wants us to
a la vida
believe that he
y
is
una persona
unable
que
to
realmente vive en su
understand,
mundo
that he is
que
unfit to
es la
plead,
película
that he is a
que
cat
vive en
that
su vida.
lives in his own
Sin
world,
embargo,
in a different reality. However, yesterday,
el señor
you were
Hilperek
able
mismo
to
lo dijo,
see that Mr.
decidió
Pereg
ser
actually
persona,
decided
como él dijo.
to come to this
Eligió ser
room.
persona.
He
Cuando quería
decided
ser gato,
to be a
podía
person. So
elegir
apparently
ser
he
gato.
can choose
Él eligió
when
ser
to be a
persona
person and when to be
porque
a cat.
quería
So yesterday he decided that he wanted to be human and that he wanted to talk to you,
entonces
to
se
give
hizo
you
free
his own version of
le
the
iba a
facts.
contestar preguntas a los
So he
abogados
actually said
y
that he would take the
avisó
questions
que no
from
le iba
the lawyers,
a contestar
but
preguntas
he clarified very conveniently that he wouldn't
cuando
take
entró
questions from the prosecution.
con un comportamiento,
So
digamos,
he entered
tranquilo,
this room,
ejemplar, podríamos decir,
being very quiet, behaving
eligió
himself.
eso y
The
trató
judge
de darle unas
actually
indicaciones
talked to him
si la
and
había
asked
comprendido y
him
él señaló que
whether
no.
he
Pero
understood, and
inmediatamente
he said
contestó
no.
desde lo bien,
However,
empezó a contestar
after that,
todas y cada
he
una de
did
las
everything
preguntas
that he was supposed
de
to
los
do and
señores.
answered to all the questions that were being asked
Contestó de
from
una
him.
manera bastante
And
clara,
actually, he was very clear in
podemos
his
decir que estaba
responses.
bastante
We
orientado.
actually can say that he was
Solamente
oriented
resta
in time and
consultar
space
los
because he
allanamientos
could remember the
y
exact
comparar las armas.
dates
¿Qué
and
es
the
lo que
days of the week
secuestraron?
when he
¿Cuántos
was
habían herido?
arrested,
¿Qué
when the
indicios
raids
aparecieron en
and the
las
searches were
huellas?
conducted into his
Incluso
premises,
una de las
when
mujeres
these
decía
women were
que el
found.
disparo de
He
arma de
knew that
fuego
actually one of
y
them
que
had died
los
from
disparos habían
3
sido con una
shots
de las
on the
armas
chest.
que habían
He
secuestrado.
knew which was the weapon used for this
Creo
homicide,
que
and
quiso
I
expresar
believe that all these
lo que
details
pensaba con total claridad
were used for him,
y
were used by him for you to
aseguró
understand
que él había
what
elegido
he
ser gato,
believes, and once again he
que él era
stated
gato
that he had
y
decided
él
to
siempre
become a cat.
cuando
And
necesitaba ser
he
persona,
said that whenever he needed
él
to be a
podía.
human, he could become human.
Profesionales de la salud
There were
también
other healthcare
estuvieron
professionals
interviniendo en
who
algunas
examined her, who
opiniones.
examined
Señor
him,
Messina,
such as
que es
Mr.
el
Messina.
psicólogo que contrataron
Mr. Messina was the
quien
psychologist
participó en
hired
el proceso
by the
pericial
defense. He
junto con
was
los
part
miembros del cuerpo
of
médico
the
forense,
expert
los
of
5
the group of experts that examined him.
Messina
And
nos dijo acá que
Dr. Messina said
rara vez, dijo, los profesionales
that
pueden
it's
revertir un
very
signo
rare
distintivo de la
for
enfermedad.
professionals to be able to identify the signs of this
Bueno,
disease. Apparently, he is probably one of the few who can detect the signs of this disease that he was mentioning. Apparently, he was the only one that was capable of seeing these signs, which went unnoticed by all the many other professionals who examined him. But this is a body-appointed psychologist. However, again, he mentioned that he has a schizotypal pathology, but he did agree with the rest, saying that this is something relative that only affects one part of his brain. And he said this disorder does not detach him completely from reality. Dr. Castex is another psychiatrist that was appointed and hired by the defense. He went even beyond and he said that Pereg is insane. He has been insane since he was 8 years old approximately, and he's always lived in a different reality. Once again, I ask myself and I ask you that for as long as he lived in Argentina, for the last 14 years, he established relationships with people here. In which reality did those relationships occur? Because he visited shops, he went into stores, he celebrated transactions, he entered into agreements. So I think that he was part of our reality. Dr. Garay, I believe that was her surname. Sorry, now Dr. Rivas. Dr. Rivas was part of the team of physicians who saw him at Hospital El Sauce. And she said that she was the only professional who established a bond, a deep bond and a deep link with this, with this patient, with the defendant. And this is why she says that Pereg has only trusted her with some information. So she came here into this room and she started telling us things about his life. She seemed very comfortable telling all this information as if she was sure about all these things, and that she said she got this information from him, but that she was not able to prove anything. So what I believe is that Dr. Rivas actually discredited the victims who are dead today and cannot speak, and who are the victims that I am representing here today. She actually said that she didn't know whether these were the result of hallucinations or not, because actually he had had a break when he was in the army, and we made many questions that she was not able to respond. He had many weapons, and actually he himself yesterday was able to explain which were the ones that he picked up from the stores and which ones he didn't. She was not able to explain many of the things that she said. She said that probably this was part of his fantasy, but she said that he liked to be isolated and to be alone. However, we saw that he was capable of being surrounded by the media, he was capable of conducting interviews, and not just during a few hours, but for many, many days. I agree with each of the things that the public prosecution has told you. As I said the first day, I am here to guarantee the rights of Piria and Lily. Their children and Lily's husband have been waiting for 2 years for justice to be done. So now it's your turn. Now you need to do justice. And I need you to understand that your decision needs to be based on the evidence. The evidence is the one that points to Gil Pereg as the author of this crime. So don't be deceived. Don't let him persuade you, because the defense told you the first day that you were able to decide whether he would go to prison or to a mental hospital. And we have already heard that the mental hospital has already discharged him as a patient. He remains there voluntarily. And actually, they told you that he could be taken away from the country so that we wouldn't pay for all these expenses in Argentina. But this is not your role. Your role is just to rely on the evidence to reach a decision so as to render a verdict of guilty or a verdict of non-guilty in the homicide of his mother and his aunt. With the public prosecution, we believe that the evidence fully proves that he is guilty beyond reasonable doubt. So when you start your discussions, when you start discussing all this evidence, please do it, remembering each of the things that were actually proven. And I'm sure that if you do that, you will reach the same conclusion that we did. Mr. Hilpereg is guilty for the homicide, the violent, willful homicide of his aunt and his mother, which he fully understood. This is why you will arrive to this verdict. Please remember which is your role. Please render a verdict of guilty because he is guilty. He is guilty of a homicide enhanced by kinship in the case of his mother, and he is guilty of a homicide enhanced by the choice of weapon. He used a firearm to shoot his aunt 3 times, being completely aware of what he was doing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, doctor. Now we would like to give the floor to the defense attorneys. Thank you. Just a second, we will upload the PowerPoint. Good morning. I would like to welcome you and my colleagues from the prosecution. I would like first to apologize because we've had many days of debate, and along these days, probably we've asked too many questions. We've made objections to certain questions by the prosecution, and our intention has always been the best. Maybe we tired you in this process, and what is the intention of the defense in this trial? As I told you first, there was a Roman person, a Roman jurist, that stated that justice is about giving each person what they deserve. And we believe that Mr. Pereg was stated to be guilty by the prosecution, but if this is not shown beyond all reasonable doubt, cannot be done so. We have defended almost during 3 years the rights of that man who's sitting there. And in this court, things are organized in this way, therefore he's seated over there. The defense is far from you, and the prosecution is near from you. Actually, it's near to you. That is because the prosecution wants to feel closer to you. There's a building for the judges, there's a building for the prosecution, and there's no building for the defense attorneys. We have tried to make this process more fair along the years, but we are here to defend the rights of that person who's sitting over there. And we believe that probably my speech is a little bit more boring than those of the prosecution lawyers, because we are here to try to help you, not to impose an option or an idea. So what are we here to do? We're here to remind you of what science stated, of what witnesses stated, and what the evidence stated along the course of this course. I'm not here to impose what you have to do, and I'm not going to talk about what the prosecutor said about us, the defense attorneys, but I'm here to state that when we took this case for the first time, we didn't know whether Mr. Pereg was capable of criminal behavior or not, if he was punishable or not, and if he had civil capacities or not. Now, of course, we have our honoraries, and unfortunately, at the beginning of this case, the only way we had of collecting our honoraries was by transferring those weapons. Therefore, we had this agreement with Mr. Pereg. However, there is a misstatement here saying that a person who is capable cannot be unpunishable. Well, Dr. Castex said this previously. A person can be capable of committing some act, however, they can be unpunishable. There was also a witness of the prosecution that stated this as well. These are two very different things. Actually, the new Act for Mental Health establishes that people have a capacity, which means that insane patients can celebrate some acts and some others are not able to do them. So the act of insanity is something that is actually in the sentence. It should be stated which acts this person can perform and which acts he can't. So this civil capacity should never be entangled with punishment. His criminal behavior and his ability to be punished or not, or to plead or not, has to do with his capacity at the moment of committing the crime. if the person can understand the criminality of the act. However, the validity of all the civil acts that he performs are completely different. So everything that he did regarding his civil actions are completely different. These are actions that are necessary for his own defense. Our country has respected the rights of those patients who are psychiatric patients. That is why our judge has created a whole TV circuit for Mr. Pereg to be able to see the trial from his cell and not to have to sit here in the courtroom. This is a very complex cause, and therefore we need to answer four questions. These four questions are: did Mr. Hilperek commit these acts? Well, the prosecutors talked about this. Is Mr. Hilperek a mentally sane or a mentally insane person? You need to wonder whether he's mentally sane or insane. Is this mental illness, and this is the most important thing, is it something that didn't allow him to understand the criminality of the act performed? Let's assume that we do not know. So if there is any doubt of this, of whether he was able to acknowledge the criminality of the fact or not, these doubt should always be held in favor of the defendant. He not only have a defendant here, we have someone who has been certified as an insane person. The person you have sitting there is a psychiatric patient who has been proved to be insane by many psychiatrists, by many pathologies that he was diagnosed with. There's a huge difference between a cancer patient and a psychiatric patient. But take a look at this. Is he crazy or is he sane? Is he Here in the prosecution, they were stated that he has a very high IQ, that he is very smart. And if you can take a look at this picture, you can see that he has a dreadlock made of mud and concrete actually. And this actually, what is coming out of this is this dreadlock that is very hard and looks like a tail. As Dr. Castex said, that is a cat's tail that is coming out from these mud and hair structure that he had in his head. So if you take a look at this picture, Mr. Hilpereg is buying firearms. He's buying weapons. And we should make visible all these problems that we have socially speaking, because listening to the prosecution would be saying, well, nothing happened here and all the blame shall be put on Mr. Pereg. But if we took a look at what happened here, someone gave this person a license to have 46 weapons. So we shouldn't take this for granted, because this shouldn't keep on happening. And this should not be an scapegoat. A mentally sane person is not hospitalized for over a year. This is just common sense. If I told now the director of a psychiatric hospital to admit me in their institution, of course they would say no, because there are certain formalities. When we state that that he admitted himself voluntarily to hospital, well, the process is different. So many things were stated in the media regarding this matter, and it was stated that this was a voluntary admission to hospital into El Sauce. You heard the words of Ms. Rivas, Dr. Villaprino. And they all state that he was a mentally disabled person, that he was delusional, that he had paraphrenia, and that he also had, as Miss Rivas stated, that there were many criteria for him to be admitted to hospital because nobody should be taking antipsychotic medication for over a year just because. This is just a matter of common sense. So let's not be fooled by the prosecutor. Nobody is taking antipsychotic medication if they are not mentally stable. Is this science or is this mere chattery gossip? So, the media, I will tell you an anecdote that happened to me a few days ago. A few days ago, actually, we saw in the media that Mr. Pereg was not a cat, but he actually believed that he was a fox. Because two of his neighbors, Omar and Jorge Salinas, stated that he had never heard him meowing. There were two neighbors also, the director of the cemetery and also another neighbor, that stated that they heard him screaming and meowing at different hours of the day. Actually, there was a neighbor that stated that he meowed and actually he called his cats meowing. A normal person doesn't meow to call upon his cats and pets. Mr. Pereg went out to his garden and he meowed to his cats. And this was stated by one of the neighbors. In his statement yesterday, the neighbors who don't like him actually had stated that they would send him to a psychiatric hospital. And this was stated yesterday. So when I was talking to the media, I asked, why are you stating this? Because there are some witnesses that stated that they heard him meowing, like Miss Silvia Lozano. And there's another witness actually that stated this. And they stated, well, we didn't include this information in the report because the guy who was taking down the notes, he left earlier. So this is what happens sometimes in the media. The media chooses what they want to broadcast. But now you have seen all the evidence of these movies. Let's base this decision on science. Why? Well, because science is what makes everything work in our society. If we do not fix an engine of a car pertaining to science, that car won't work. If we don't fix our problems based on science, well, we will be raped, we will be stolen, we will be mocked, we will be killed. Therefore, our criminal acts should also be based on science to be able to fix them. And we want things to work once and for all. So, who represents science today? Well, the appointed experts. The appointed experts are the ones who represent science, and you've seen many experts and you've heard many new terms about psychology and psychiatry over the past few days. And this is very hard because when I took Mr. Pereg's case, I actually went to see him and he talked about certain issues and he stated, and I was talking to Lautaro, and Lautaro said maybe he's unpunishable, he's unable to plead, or he's unfit to plead. We talked to Mr. Messina back then, and we proposed him as an appointed expert. And when Mr. Messina examined him, he talked to other psychiatrists as well that were also experts from Buenos Aires and other parts. And after several interviews, he stated that he had psychotic structures. And as defendants of Mr. Pereg, we went to different TV shows and we stated that maybe he was a strange person, but we never stated that he was unpunishable. So when Mr. Messina stated that this was an unpunishable person, that he was unfit to be punished, that is when we changed our defense. So how do we value the assessment of different experts? Well, we have to evaluate what they say, how they say it, and also we have to evaluate their career, their expertise, their background. If we had a heart problem, for instance, we would like the best cardiologist of Mendoza, of Argentina, and possibly of the world to operate on us. If we had an eye problem, we would go to the best experts in the matter. So we would try for our problems to be solved by those who have the best background and career, for those who know best. What happens? I don't know if you remember The Simpsons. There are two types of professionals. Dr. Hibbert, who is the one that always brings an answer to the Simpson family, and Dr. Nick Riviera, who is a disaster. Every time that he intervenes, he makes a disaster out of it. So I would classify experts in this way. Who would we rather have us treated, Dr. Hibbert or Dr. Nick Riviera? Dr. Castex, well, we have the honor of having him in our defense. Dr. Castex has over 65 years of experience. Those are more years than any of you actually are today, just exercising psychiatry, just in the exercise of his profession. He graduated at the age of 22. He is a forensic doctor, he's a psychiatrist. He was actually called upon Nisman cases, on Maradona's cases. He's in the internet. He has great background and career. In some sentences, actually, from the Tejerina case, for instance, the Supreme Court of Justice of Argentina, and I quote what the Supreme Court is saying, it states that in a case such as this, that the dogmatic statement, the defendant showed that he knew what he wanted and what he was doing, etc. When they state the fact of the forensic field and the evidence in the fact that they have their intellect unaffected, but their effectiveness altered. In this respect, all the jurists that are here know that the judges of the Supreme Court quote the expert that we have brought and that we have appointed for the hardest case. So none of the witnesses that have been attributed by the prosecution have half of the background and career that Dr. Castex has. A journalist, Mr. Coloro, also stated that he is that he's a jurist of great renown, and stated that over in a report of over 50 pages, he stated that he lives in a parallel reality, that he cannot interject values as a normal person can. And I thought that this phrase was very consistent to what was stated yesterday. He cannot have the same values that we have, Mr. Pereg. His inner compass, the compass that tells him right from wrong, is broken inside of him. He talks about his cat's hair. He states that any of us who are here in this courtroom today, all our lives are not worth as much as the lives of his cats. That's what he stated yesterday. That is the key that states why his inner compass that distinguishes right from wrong is broken. This inner compass is broken because he broke it. No, it's broken because it's broken from day one. He has a disease that is called paraphrenia, and he's not guilty for this disease. He has delusions. And in this delusion, in this delirium, the person is disconnected from his own reality. Therefore, he cannot see the same things that we are seeing. He's not living through life the way we live through life. And this was stated by Dr. Castex. He also stated, besides paraphrenia, that, and this is something that I don't know if the members of the prosecution don't listen, but it was stated yesterday that paraphrenia implies that intelligence is intact. But there's delirium, there's delusion, there's hallucination, and other facts. So people with paraphrenia can perform in their daily life. I told you as we started at the beginning that I have friends with very dangerous mental diseases that do lots of complex things. And paraphrenia is the typical case in which a patient believes himself that he's Napoleon. They're alienated, they're psychotic, they are crazy. And Dr. Castex also stated that civil capabilities are different from other capabilities. So he also stated that you should think upon his inability to plead or him being unpunishable, because he has a disease that he's not guilty for. He's delusional and he doesn't see reality as we do. So how can we prove that he's guilty? Even though this is an atrocious fact, even though this is a terrible thing, it doesn't matter what he did because he has a mental disease. And this mental disease doesn't allow him from understanding what he's doing because he lives in a parallel reality. So how can these persons be found guilty? It's very difficult. What the prosecution didn't tell you was that were appointed have a report, and judges actually need to follow this. Judges need to follow the experts' reports to do the sentence. I don't know why we should move away from the experts' reports. Dr. Villaprino has a great background as well. He actually has a career that dates for over 35 years. He's the president of an international association of psychiatrists, and he said exactly the same thing as Dr. Castex said. He has a paraphrenia. This is a case of paraphrenia with psychotic functioning. For you to know, psychotic people are people who doesn't have critical judgment. Their inner compass is broken. They have delusions and delirium, and when we touch this delirium core or delirious core, this delusion is activated. If you don't touch this delirious core, then it's not activated. Therefore, I remember that now Mr. Pereg is better than when we started, actually, because this was not activated. His declaration, his statement yesterday was not delusional at all. He was delusional, actually, and what he has, this condition is irreversible. Now, Mr. Castex, when I showed him the picture of him purchasing weapons, he was shocked and he said, nobody should actually sell weapons to a person such as this. How can he have his record from the National Agency of Firearms Control? This is Mr. Messina, and I would like to go through the evidence because I want you to base your decision on evidence. I'm not trying to be disrespectful, I'm just trying to be helpful. I would like to attest to the evidence and not to just chatter and gossip. It was said that at the moment of the event, most probably Mr. Pereg didn't understand the criminality of the fact. Uh, he stated that he cannot be 100% certain that he is unpunishable, but he stated that he didn't understand the criminality of the event. He actually referred to a shooter from Belgrano and four other different cases. A granddaughter who actually killed his, a grandmother who actually killed his grandchild, and all these were, all these things were used to find him unpunishable.
And here there's something interesting because Messina was one of the deponents, and he said, my first license for my first license to carry weapons, I didn't have to see a psychologist. We said, why? Well, he said, I don't know. We get weapons without seeing a psychologist. For your first license, you will see how dangerous our system is, the system that we live in. Mr. Messina also said that he checked a police report from Israel and that the report said that this person already had a recommendation for being admitted to hospital. But here, the private prosecutor can check the reports and the recordings, and there's a report from the police from Israel. This is public, you can check it. We didn't offer this as an exhibit, and Mr. Messina saw this and he prepared a report on this. There were recommendations for his admission to hospital, and this was true in Israel due to paranoia and because he had escaped. This is what the police said in Israel. Then they met insanity, because we've heard that he's very intelligent, that he's a smart person. However, he walked around with thousands of dollars actually, and one of his friends here stated that he was swindled for $300,000, that he would lend money to people because with that part of his mind that was preserved, he thought that he could lend money and make a profit from that. But he would lend money to people without a legal instrument, without a contract, and therefore he could do nothing when he didn't get paid. And I asked him, you were swindled, you were the victim of a scam for $300,000. Somebody took your money, this is the equivalent to 2 Ferrari cars, and you didn't do anything? We had a witness by the name of Willie here, and he said that he would have gone to ask for what was his, but he didn't think about that. In his mind, in his poor mind, which is not very practical, he decided to file a complaint to the Association of Architects. And this was a case of a scam of $300,000. This is an example of his pragmatic insanity. We heard that he was swindled once and again. And I asked, why didn't you use force? Didn't you go violent? And he said, well, no, because I didn't have a group of two-legged creatures to come with me to claim for that money. Then Messina also mentioned the interviews with the media, and he said that he moved his arms a lot, which is typically what psychotic people do. He would point at people, he would accuse people using the gestures and the movements of a psychotic person. Mr. Messina interpreted this as the typical traits of psychotic people. Also, he mentioned that he had patients who were lawyers, who were physicians, and who suffered schizophrenia. And something which is very interesting for you to know is that he is a disinterested party because he received no fees for this. He received no compensation for this expert examination. Then we have Mrs. Jimena Rivas, Dr. Rivas, who was her psychologist in El Sauce. She said that she saw him every day from 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. She said that the diagnosis was paraphrenia, that this was a chronic condition, that she was able to verify and confirm her hallucinations and delirium. And she said, and we need to make a connection with what Walter Lavida said, because somebody who sees the patient more, of course, has more capacity to make a diagnosis. So there we have Dr. Rivas, the one who has seen him the most, diagnoses him with paraphrenia. Walter Lavilla from the penitentiary, he mentioned that he had a schizotypical disorder, a schizotypal disorder. He said that he could not arrive to a true diagnosis, and he said that no psychometric techniques were used. So we asked him which were the protocols that they use, and they say none. And actually, this is why I insist on the fact that everyone should read the investigation, because sometimes those who sit here, the deponents, apparently forget about many things. This man, Walter Lavilla, said, well, I'm just there in the penitentiary to address the urgencies. Then we have Dr. De La Torre, the same thing. He's after one of the doctors of the penitentiary. He, once more, we need to highlight that both of them said that once he arrived, antipsychotics were given to him as soon as he arrived. It was not that he had a headache. He received this medication because he was psychotic. He didn't receive this because of any other reason. This is common sense. An antipsychotic is given to a psychotic person. Then, after this, the forensic physicians examined him. Then we have Dr. Gemayara. This is a special case. She said that probably when the facts occurred, she said that he was punishable because he could understand the criminality of the act. She was objected because of perjury. And you know why? This is false. This is perjury. Because during the investigation, and I will read what she says, there you can see the contradiction and the inconsistencies. I asked, based on your conclusion, the defendant, at the time of the event, did he had an altered conscience to understand? She said, I cannot determine this. I cannot determine whether or not his conscience was altered. But here she sat on this chair and she lied to you, because this is what happens in this country many times. Then she continues to say that actually she saw him afterwards and therefore she could not determine whether or not he was in his right mind or not. But apparently here, when she testified in front of you, she no longer had doubts like the ones she expressed before. This is why we have these problems in our country. This is why we have all this corruption. I don't know what happened here, but we have already pressed charges because of perjury, because here we have the evidence. And I talked to other psychologists, and they said I would never do what she did. So they were admitting to the fact that what she said was wrong. And everyone knows that Gil Pereg is a psychotic. All the professionals speak about that. This is the number of the complaint that we filed. And you know what? We will go all the way, because if this ends up influencing the jury, this might be a mistrial. So this is for you to realize how serious these things are. I'm going to make a summary about the different witnesses. In order to assess a witness, you need to assess for bias, to know whether they are biased or not, and to know whether they have any type of psychological training. We have Regisa, head of the ANMAC, the Firearm Control Authority. He talked about some tests being done, but he didn't mention any special technique or method. He said that he knew the professionals who conducted the tests, but that he didn't know which were the tests. This is no valid evidence. Then we have Mario Rilli, the commissioner of the tourist police. He said that one day after the crime, Mr. Pereg had planned a trip to Italy. He was going to travel with 4 of his cats, because, remember, these are his children, the cats. He said that he had bought that plane ticket on the year 2018, 1 year before. He cancelled this trip 1 day after the crime, after the day he supposedly killed his mother and aunt. So I ask you, were he a normal person? Wouldn't he have taken that trip? A normal person would probably fly to Italy to escape. Of course, once more, we're not talking about a normal person. This is not a smart person. This is not a master of crime. Then we have Jose Rey, the owner of the apartment that was rented by the victims. He said that Gil Pereg was wearing a white hat. He was wearing this white hat because he removed the helmet made of cement that he had on his head to prepare for his mother's visit. And when he removed this sort of cement helmet, his head was injured. This is why he was wearing this white hat. He's not a narcissistic. You've seen that he doesn't care about appearances. He doesn't care about looking good. Then Jose Vega said that he was extravagant, that he was strange. He doesn't remember receiving a report from the Israeli police. However, he did receive an email with that information. and he said that there were many inconsistencies. And this is what happens to all of us whenever we listen to what Mr. Pereg has to say. He is supposed to be a master of crime according to the prosecution. However, yesterday you were able to listen to what he said yesterday and which was his justification. It was actually quite pitiful. Of course, this doesn't add up because this is the result of hallucination. This is delirium. This is fantasy. And this is not something that I am saying. This was said by the expert, by Mr. Castex. Excuse me, but you have been speaking for 40 minutes, so please try to be brief. Yes, Your Honor, I apologize. Let's continue. Then we have Silvina Campos from the police. She is in charge of searches. She said that she lived in a filthy condition, that there were dead cats everywhere, that he slept on a mattress on the floor. And we thought that these things were very strange. We thought that this was the very definition of an insane person. This master of crime was actually looking at the place where the bodies were buried at all times. This is something for you to take into account.
So, what are the chances of simulating of a person that has a psychiatric disease? A normal person doesn't stare at the place where he buried the corpses. There was human feces all around his house. He didn't use the toilets. And also, Gustavo Ojeda stated that his cats were in very bad condition and stated that his cats had problems of nutrition, bad health conditions. And imagine this, he cannot take care of himself. How is he going to take care of his cats? Jorge Omar Salinas, we already stated this, but Mr. Pereg told Mr. Jorge Salinas that he was from Palestine and his son that he was from Norway, actually. Gladys Delgado said that he weighed over 120 kilograms, that he had 5 phones, that he received money from his mother, and that everything that he had was his mother and his cats. And the only person who actually sent him money was his mother. Why would he kill her if that was his only source of income? Why would he consciously kill her if she was his only source of income? He has nothing left. He's left alone in the world. Nancy Diaz, she stated that she heard screaming at any time, 5 in the morning or so, meowing from his house. And this is a witness that stated this, Nancy Diaz. She also stated the fact where he had burned some computers, and that was the director of the cemetery located near his house. It's important to mention that she heard screaming because a normal person doesn't scream out of the blue. Now we will finish off. This trial is about one thing: making visible the mental disease. A sentence will imply ignoring the reality. This means that if this man over there is guilty, our health system is deficient and we are also guilty. A few years ago, there was a kid who actually cut the throat of a journalist. If we had seen mental health problems as being a problem, we would have saved many lives. I'm not talking about guilt. I'm talking about taking preventive measures, preventive actions to stop these things from happening. If we put this problem on a cage, if we put this person in prison, this will happen again. these problems are bigger. It means that we don't learn. We have to learn from psychiatric patients. They can be delusional at one time, but they can do things in other moments of the day. Let's learn. Let's make this problem visible. Let's not ignore this. Yesterday, there was a problem that had a psychiatric person who came over to our buffet, and I realized this because along our profession we have been able to see people with psychiatric problems, but the prosecution's thesis makes these problems invisible so that anybody could be the victims later on. Our biggest danger in this debate is ignorance of mental diseases. Therefore, please, I request you to save lives because putting these problems in a box, boxing it out, it means ignoring these problems. Let's not do so. We need to do justice. Therefore, I would like you and I would ask you to declare Mr. Pereg unpunishable. I'm defending the rights of a person who is incapable to defend himself. So I would like to request you that if you believe at least to have an attenuated murder sentence. This means that he had a criminal conscience of the event performed, but because of his because of his mental condition, he couldn't understand that these were his mother and aunt. We would like to apply an extenuating circumstances of the murder. And please don't allow anyone to go beyond your beliefs. We know what the experts have said. We know what they have stated. So don't be convinced. Don't be beaten by the prosecution. Take your decision based on your own convictions and thoughts. Don't be deceived and do justice and save lives. Thank you very much. I would like 5 more minutes, please, for my colleague. Doctor, you've spoken for 15 minutes already. Well, the floor is yours. Ladies and gentlemen, members of the jury, I would like to be as brief as possible because we are running short of time. I wanted to say a few words.
I have heard what the prosecution was saying, and I believe that this is completely nonsense. We believe that they went against our rights. This seems like a fight between dogs and cats, but I think that here we should all pay attention and acknowledge the work of professionals, of healthcare professionals, and this is because professionals deserve this credit, and this is true for everyone. Everyone deserves respect because each of these professions and occupations are decent occupations based on knowledge. So it doesn't matter whether Dr. Messina was appointed or not by the defense. We cannot doubt what they said because all these professionals deserve our respect.
Now I would like to talk about two concepts that it's important for you to bear in mind before your decision. First off, nationality, citizenship, and residency. These are three concepts. Nationality has to do with a person that is born in a country. For instance, I'm born in Argentina and therefore I'm Argentinian. He is Israeli and that is because he was born in Israel. Citizenship is has to do with the rights granted by a country, and residency is the place where you live. And Argentina was stated not to deport extranational citizens, actually. And Mr. Hilpereg has an ID of Argentina because he's a resident, but not because he's a citizen. Therefore, he will be able to be extradited if that is requested. Also, costs. When you take a decision, when you buy a car, when you go to the groceries, for instance, any decision in your life always has to do with costs. And this is also the case for us here in justice. So this is the cost of a person. For instance, food daily cost is 500 pesos. He receives 4 daily meals: breakfast, lunch, snack at tea time, and then dinner. So these implies 2,000 pesos daily. If we multiply this by 365 days, it's 730,000 pesos. And if we talk about life imprisonment, we are telling the Mendocinian society that if life imprisonment happens, we have to pay over 36.5 million pesos only in meals. There are other costs like transportation and of course many other costs as well implied. Imagine that Mr. Hilpereg is dangerous for himself and for others. So if something happens, of course, lots of costs are incurred. Now, going back to what I was saying before in the initial statement, we have several options that on the one hand, we have imprisonment and also we have hospitalization. We don't see the fact that he is set free as members of the defense. Imprisonment, as my colleague explained, it could be a temporal imprisonment or life imprisonment. I'm not going to go deep into temporal imprisonment, but it's a number of years. And also hospitalization could be in Argentina, but also in any other hospital around the world where the conditions are established. There are also other possibilities. It could very well happen that you have doubts. And if you do have doubts, ask for Dr. Villapriño's video. Dr. Villapriño is an appointed expert that was appointed by the prosecution, and he is not part of the forensic board, but he was the director of El Sauce, and it's very, very illustrative actually. There are many other videos that you can request to base your decision upon regarding all the assessments done by experts. And if you are still in doubt, send this person to a psychiatric institution because this is a dangerous person, dangerous for himself and for others as well. If you do not agree and your verdict is that you have not unanimously reached an agreement, please do not betray your own convictions. Don't betray your ideas and your common sense. So as a conclusion, analyze the experts' reports, analyze the consequences of the decisions that you will take for Mr. Pereg and for the society, and defend your own ideas and beliefs. In this way, you will be doing justice, which is justice for the society and justice for the defendants as well. Thank you very much and sorry for taking so long. Before we give the floor to Mr. Pereg, I would like to give some instructions to the members of the jury.
I would like to give some instructions to the jury. This is the summation. I didn't want to interrupt Mr. Legrand, but everything he said regarding the report that the defense presented, the complaint that the defense presented for perjury against a witness that testified here, and the consequences that he mentioned should not be considered at all. This is not evidence. This is not about circumstances that occurred in this courtroom during this trial. This is not part of the evidence that you need to analyze and to assess to render your verdict. Okay. Now, Mr. Pereg, would you like to add something else to what has been said by the defense? Can we please give him a microphone? I will request, Your Honor, if it's possible for him to walk to the bench. Are you going to make any questions? Not, Mr. Pereg. I just asked whether or not you want to add something to what the defense already said. Yes. I would like to add what I said yesterday. I would like you to take note about this. Because you're blaming me they want to say that I did things that I didn't do. And they are doing this because I'm strange, because I'm unusual. They are blaming me just because I look different. And therefore it was easy for them to see me as their scapegoat. This is why I filed a complaint. This is why I reported that my mother and my aunt went missing. And they didn't want to investigate. The police didn't want to investigate on that, on their whereabouts. Instead, they decided to blame me. They decided to accuse me. Because they were missing. This is why they made so many searches into my house. During the first raid, they seized my weapons, they seized a gun, and this was during the first warrant, the first search that they conducted. Then the second time, they found nothing. Then I was arrested. This was on Friday morning. I was taken, I was sent to San Felipe, to prison. And my house was empty, and this is when they conducted a second raid, and this is when they found the corpses. Two weeks later, before they weren't able to find anything. And it's so convenient that just when they sent me to San Felipe, only then did they find these corpses. This is what I wanted to state. They tried to incriminate me. They put this incriminating evidence in my premises. As I said yesterday, I've never seen these bodies, I've never seen these corpses. My mother is not dead, and I won't believe she's dead unless I see the body. They wouldn't show me. If they really find these bodies, wouldn't you think that this is strange because it was just the day I was not there? This is so convenient. 2 weeks went by. They found nothing during these 2 weeks, but they did find something once I was taken to prison. This is what I wanted to say. I think that they just wanted to blame this crime on me. They wanted to incriminate me. I think that they found these 2 corpses elsewhere and they took it. They took them to my premises. Then they arrested me. They arrested me on a Friday. Then they brought these 2 corpses and they put them inside my property and then conveniently found them on Saturday. As I said before, my handgun had been seized by the police already. So of course it was very easy for them to use my weapon to incriminate me. They wanted to make it look as if the crime was committed with my gun, but I didn't have my gun with me at the time because they had seized my gun before. So what they did was to shoot one of these corpses with my gun. This is what I wanted to say because it calls my attention. Thank you very much, Mr. Pereg. Thank you very much. I would like to say something else. So, to finish and to make my point, they arrested me on Friday. Then they used my gun for you to find the bullets inside these bodies. They buried the corpses inside my property to incriminate me. And they made no tests to check whether or not I had powder. I had gunpowder in my hands. Never were these tests conducted. I think that these tests should have been conducted because it had been a long time since I last used the guns. Otherwise, I would have had some signs in my hand, and I didn't. And this proves that I didn't do it, that these tests were not conducted. This is why I wanted to make this clarification. After they seized the guns, they themselves, the police, the prosecution, they used my gun to incriminate me. They filled those bodies with my bullets to incriminate me. Okay, you had already stated that, Mr. Pereg. Therefore, if you have nothing else to add, then you can return to your cell. You will be able to follow everything that's going on here in the trial from the cell, and then we will have you come once more at the time of the verdict. Okay, so now we will have a break for the jury to take some coffee, to use the restroom, and then after this break, You will return to receive the final instructions for the summation.
5 minutos
Please,
para hacer una
just
reflexión.
5 minutes for the final instructions. Thank you very much.
A las partes con respecto a las instrucciones finales que ya habíamos litigado y respecto de la cual todas las partes dieron su consentimiento, quería hacerles saber que debí suprimir, en razón de que el señor Gil Pereg declaró el día de ayer, suprimí lo relativo a el caso en que no declare el imputado. No sé si la defensa ya también tiene su copia, Gonzalo. Ah, bien. Es decir, habíamos hablado del derecho a no declarar entre los principios generales del proceso penal, pero en razón de que el señor Gil Pereg el día de ayer hizo uso de su derecho a declarar, suprimí ese apartado. No sé si ya lo encontró, doctor Legrand. Principios generales, estado jurídico de inocencia. A continuación del estado jurídico de inocencia, me parece que ya son muchas páginas las que ha pasado, doctor. En las 6 aproximadamente. Está en carilla simple, me dicen. Claro, quizás por eso en el suyo es más.
Después de duda razonable.
Claro, venía en realidad, si no me equivoco, después de estado jurídico de inocencia, yo hacía una referencia a página 7 al caso en que no declarara el imputado y a que eso no debía interpretarse como una presunción de culpabilidad en su contra. En razón de que el señor Gil Pereg ayer declaró, debí suprimir esa referencia y paralelamente incorporé en el acápite de principios de la prueba la definición de lo que es prueba. No sé si todas las partes lo tienen. Para mí es la página 9/10.
En la parte de
definición de prueba, doctor.
Sí.
Bien, agregué un punto 3. Lo que declaró el acusado en el juicio también es prueba a ser valorada por ustedes. En caso de que el acusado decida declarar recordándoles que no está obligado a hacerlo, ustedes deben saber que el acusado, a diferencia de los testigos, no declara bajo juramento, por lo que podrá decir en su defensa cosas verdaderas o falsas sin que ello implique la comisión de delito alguno. ¿Hay acuerdo con esta instrucción? Es en función de que, tal cual las habíamos litigado, hasta ese momento no había declarado el señor Gil Pereg y ahora declaró. Entonces le tengo que explicar al jurado que debe valorar la declaración del señor Gil Pereg con el resto de la prueba. ¿Es correcto? ¿Hay acuerdo del Ministerio Público, la querella, la defensa? Bien. Entonces ahora sí, para todos, un receso de 15, 20 minutos para que el jurado pueda despejarse y volvemos para la lectura de las instrucciones finales.